From timeless classics to small indie projects, from the best of a series to its black sheep, from release titles to old gems, 2025 was one hell of a year for me. With 37 finished games across 5 different platforms, I wanted to make a full recap video to celebrate the good, the bad and the ugly in gaming this year, as I rank every game I finished this year. Very original concept, I know. This video is heavily inspired by Daryl's backlog series, as I also wrote notes about everything I played throughout the year with my expectations, first impressions and final thoughts. I'll go over these games chronologically from January to December, with the exception of my game of the year that I'll leave for the end of the video so I can finish this on a positive note. I'll keep spoilers to a minimum, especially for new games, but in case you want to skip any entry, every game is timestamped. No need to explain how I rate these games beforehand, I'll explain as they go, and honestly, you should not care about ratings and scores ever. Luckily, my first finished game is a great example on how I was taking my ratings. Developed by Nomada Studio, the same folks behind Gris, Neva is an action platformer that feels like a moving painting. I first finished it in 2024 but wanted to get all achievements, so I got 6 extra hours out of it, even though you can finish the game in one sitting. And I'll admit that after finishing it 3 times in just a week, you notice its pacing isn't exactly the most exciting, but honestly, it really doesn't matter. The fact that once again Nomada managed to deliver an emotional story without using any words is super impressive. And personally, I prefer the gameplay in Neva, even though the combat is also quite simple. At the end of the day, what really matters is how a game can affect you, how you can't stop loving it despite its flaws, how just listening to a track from the game you get to remember what you were feeling when you played. If a game can do all that to you, why push it away? I know for Neva I just can't, and I never tried. It goes straight to S tier. And in case I didn't convince you to play it yet, yes, you can pet a dog. Next up, another replay and another indie title, this time a really well-known one, Limbo. I do have great memories of replaying the demo back in the Xbox 360 when I had no money to buy any games, but I'll be honest, I'm not crazy about Limbo. Unfortunately, I think it's just because I like Inside a lot more. I find the puzzles that require somewhat precise timing to be a drag, and the environmental storytelling was not there yet. Nonetheless, a true indie classic that everybody should play. I'll leave B tier for games like that where I like them but I'm not a huge fan of. I still need to go back to Limbo once again and get all achievements. Maybe this might change my feelings towards it. So that's the end of January with 2 replay games, which is really low considering the number of hours played, but that's for games that were to get finished next month. Finally a new game to the finished list. Well, not exactly new since Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is a certified 90s classic. In every way possible, to the incredible soundtrack and presentation, to the excruciating and unfair difficulty in this game. I really like Sonic, but I've played mostly the 3D games growing up. I know people hate them, especially people that grew up with the 2D version of the Blue Blur, but I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of 2D Sonic games. And if it wasn't for the save states, I'm not sure if I would have finished this game in less than 20 hours given how bad I suck at platformers. I try to keep save stating at a minimum, but when patience runs thin, they just get overused like crazy. I do want to finish this game again without them because I think this game is pretty awesome. It is Sonic having to cling onto a rocket and go into space to defeat a metal version of himself, kinda awesome. The soundtrack is barely worth talking about considering how iconic it is, but yeah, just a B tier for now, and I think it will be hard to change my mind on that. Now for one of the games that drained my time back in January, Control by Remedy. It is the type of game that does not ease you into anything pretty much. Combat isn't hard per se, sometimes it has its moments, but overall the difficulty feels fine. But fully understanding the mechanics and most notoriously the story is quite the task. Being bombarded by papers, audio files, and long dialogues full of gibberish and terms that don't make sense to an average human being made me even consider dropping the game a couple hours in.
Can you tell me what an object of power is exactly? This is all, well, new to me. Don't worry, I love going over the basics. So objects of power are mundane objects that house paranatural energies and have developed a link to the astral plane and can thus be controlled, which is what differentiates them from altered items, which are still housings of paranatural forces, but are more volatile and cannot be bound in the peri-utilitarian sense. Got it?
No.
This?
Of course not. Yeah, Astral Planet. Super duper laser time. But I persevered, and I don't regret a thing as this game goes straight to A tier. When you give it time, you slowly make connections between the documents. The weird puppet shows start making sense both in their form and content as you experience all these concepts in the Federal Bureau of Control. All these collectibles throughout the game aren't just silly items on a checklist that fill the gaps of lore. They are actually complex pieces of media that piece together a cohesive world. As I played more, it was clear to me that Remedy had a goal to push the video game media to its limit in storytelling. And I'll say they succeeded. And if that wasn't enough, the gameplay is also super fucking fun. What the fuck? I wish more games like Contra existed. And by that I mean more 3D person shooters with an RPG-like type of progression with infinite bullets, a decent energy shield and an evade button. Is that too much to ask? Figuring out the best ways on how to deal with different enemy types, either by just killing them, throwing world assets at them, or seizing control of their actions, was super engaging. Even though it can be tiring sometimes when you just want to enjoy a moment of peace to appreciate the details of an area. Incredible game that I'll add to the replay list after I get a new GPU because this shit looks pretty rough on my PC. You'll see this list will become quite big by the end of the video. In case you've never seen me before, I used to speedrun Dark Souls 1, so I feel rather obliged to take a little longer on another replayed game, Dark Souls 3. This new casual playthrough was pretty special not only because I haven't played this in nearly 8 years, but also because this was my first time playing the DLCs, and I had the goal to finally get all achievements in this game. Also, I made a scythe build, and we all know that scythes are awesome. Playing Dark Souls 3 in 2025 was slightly weird. It's just so ugly. I'm not really the guy that points everywhere in Elden Ring and all, but man, Dark Souls 3 is so grey and dull, and even though that's usually the dark fantasy setting MO, that makes traversing most areas, regardless of how varied they are, super boring. In terms of level design, they are also pretty hit or miss. Sometimes they are incredibly interconnected and fun to understand, and other times it feels like a torrentless Elden Ring, with open areas filled with enemies, useless loot, and boredom. Places I feel like I hated before, such as Irithyll Dungeon, now excel in comparison to the fast travel plagued legacy dungeons in Elden Ring. Take Cathedral of the Deep for example. It has one bonfire and shortcuts? Holy shit, what an insane idea, huh? I also have an unpopular opinion about the DLCs. I find the first one, Ashes of Ariandel, to be much better when compared to the second one, Ringed City. While Ariandel had a boring art direction, the level design was super interesting. Spotting items in an area that seems to be unreachable just made me think how they can be connected to places I've explored before. But both Drag Heap and Ringed City felt like Elden Ring laboratories. Huge ass areas with some degree of verticality, but with a level design that is lackluster on its own and is outshadowed by adding billions of annoying enemies there. And the areas are so broad that traversing them almost made me hold the Y button and press D-pad up to summon Torrent. After killing Gale, it was time to grind some achievements. It was a mix of anxiety and boredom. The anxiety part was related to the Rings achievement that would require me to go to NG Plus and NG++ cycles. Since I took the first normal cycle as casually as I could, I had some rings already, so I had to make my own route to take on the remaining rings. Since I'm pretty bad at routing in general, I was worried of fucking something up in the planning and then be stuck chasing after some lost and useless ring in the late game. But when that achievement popped up, I was super happy. Even though I was glad that my time with Dark Souls 3 would be over, right there, after closing the game, I felt empty somehow. Almost 2 months playing this game, it felt like this would never be over, and now I feel like maybe I should have taken my time. I'm skeptical about From Software's future projects since Elden Ring wasn't my cup of tea. Its DLC was one of the worst experiences I had in gaming. Night Rain looks like 90% rehashed content, and Duskbloods looks like Night Rain but in Bloodborne. I still haven't played Sekiro, but I can't say I'm really interested. Dark Souls was never about mechanical difficulty for me. It was about understanding a complex system, being the weird upgrade progression, weapon scaling, the lore, and how to explore the world. And ever since Bloodborne, From Software seems to be shifting their games towards harder and harder bosses, and that made me lose interest in their games. And maybe that's why it's just too hard to say goodbye to Dark Souls 3, the last From Software game that I actually loved. And it's not even my favorite one. My favorite one is the first one. Dark Souls 3 will be in A tier. A goal I had this year was to get to know gaming series I like a little bit better. 2025 being the year of the ninja, what better time to know Ninja Gaiden a little better? And what better game to play than the very first one for the NES? Ninja Gaiden is a game that is visually very impressive to this day, and it just feels crazy to look at a game this old that really tried telling a story with cutscenes. The general mechanics of Ninja Gaiden are actually super cool. The basics are jumping, sword slashing, and wall kicking. There are power-ups scattered across the map called Limbo, which will give Ryu a different attack. They are consistent per stage, meaning you always find the same drops when you attack the special boxes of the stage. Another really cool visual thing is how these boxes change per act in a way to always match the style of the area. It's pretty neat how the developers took their time to make every act feel and look very different. Overall, I would say my experience with Ninja Gaiden was mostly positive, up until the final act. I don't think I've played a game so physically and mentally draining in my entire life. I didn't just suffer a lot as I expected to, I was in agony by the end of it. This series, being the old games or the new ones, is known for its soul-crushing difficulty, and oh boy did this crush my soul into little pieces. The crazy thing is, for the most part, Ninja Gaiden, even though it's an NES game, is quite fair. Getting to replay levels after game overs made the sensation of skill progression feel concrete. Often I would see myself doing movement that felt optimal, instead of the usual wait and be safe that platformers make us do. And getting better at Ninja Gaiden is visually perceptible, as the wall jumping feels faster, the precise slashing at enemies and boxes feel natural, and get well mixed with the fast-paced movement. Getting better at this game is truly satisfying. That said, I was quite hopeful to finish this game without save scamming, but then Act 6 happened. The final act of this game is cruel, brutal, merciless, sadistic, and lots of other synonyms I found at thesorrows.com. I could say why, but I promise no spoilers, and that also applies for games made in the 80s. Having to rely on save states was probably the only thing that soured my bittersweet experience with Ninja Gaiden, so I rank it in B. I still want to finish it without them at some point. I am supposedly... Whoa! That's a ninja with a jet? Now for a game I really didn't want to rank as low as it's going to be. Blasphemous. I'm not really well versed into Metroidvania games. I do love Hollow Knight, but I can't say I'm experienced with the genre. But whenever I play a game released after it and I see a blue map with white borders, I can't help but just feel disappointed. But that's okay, because what I look for in a Metroidvania is the joy of exploration, the excitement to walk around and find useful items for my adventure, the amusement of deciphering a labyrinth. and that does not happen in Blasphemous. You don't really get items that make traversing the map easier, like a double jump for example. Instead, you find lots of upgrades for HP, magic, and healing wares, as this game focuses a lot more in combat than anything else. It's a game that asks you to endure the suffering, get better, and overcome the challenges it puts in front of you. It is, after all, a walk of penitence. But despite loving the Catholic vibe of Blasphemous, at first I thought the story would really get a hold on me, but storytelling through item descriptions is something that I can't enjoy anymore. I feel like it's a game that had literally everything to make me adore it, yet I just don't. I find the backtracking filled to the brim of enemies to be a chore, and the unskippable cutscenes before bosses to be a bore. The key word here is disappointing, as you can see, and that's how games ranked C will go. While Blasphemous is for sure not a bad game, and I didn't hate playing it, I cannot say I was thrilled during my playthrough, but it had good moments. Looking at it right now, almost a year later, makes me think I should give it a second chance. This is an exclusive version of Sonic 2 released only for the 3DS. I thought this version should barely count, but since it adds a lot of different features compared to the Steam version, I thought I might as well mention it. Essentially, it's the same game with lots of accessibility features, such as starting in any stage you want. After finishing it, you unlock Super Sonic mode, a way to play as him without getting the Chaos Emeralds. After a little bit of research, I found out that these two features are in the Sega Genesis version as well, but they require a cheat code to access. I guess the only real difference in the 3DS version, and a pretty big difference, is the Ring Keeper mode, in which you don't lose every ring after getting hit, making the game significantly easier. And that was probably how I managed to finish this game in 2 hours instead of 4. I finished this game only because I wanted to practice stages to finish the Steam version without save states, but that plan fell flat. The games are essentially the same, so they'll be ranked the same. After an undermining month with only 2 finished replays, 6 games in a month was quite a way to pick up the pace. Next month university starts, so I'll have a little bit less time to dedicate to gaming. Celeste really is everything they say it is. An absolutely beautiful journey about conquering your fears, learning how to live with your negative side, and trusting yourself. Yet, if that wasn't enough, the gameplay is top notch. It's a platformer with very basic mechanics. Madeline can jump, dash, and grab to walls. What separates a good and bad platformer is not just the level design, that is simply perfect in Celeste, but also the difficulty progression. And I think Celeste is just as hard as it needs to be. I wouldn't like a game about climbing a mountain to be an easy task. The soundtrack also is easily one of the best I've heard this entire year. Hearing Lana Raine's synths felt like I was put under a spell. It felt haunting and inspiring. It made me want to keep moving on, but being afraid to do it at the same time. But what really got me in Celeste was the ending. I'll go ahead and rank it S tier. As promised, this will be spoiler light, so I'll just say that Celeste is the perfect representation of journey over destination, as getting to the top doesn't mean much to us, but it means a lot to Madeline. It's also how I feel about the gameplay. Sure, it's cool to get to the end of a level and all, but the way up there is what mattered. Learning how to properly platform between spikes, bubbles, and floating feathers was the real reward. Celeste is truly a one-of-a-kind game, and I'm really happy to have finally played it. I've only played the A-sides up until the core, so I still have a lot of extra content to do. Pharrell fucking sucks though, you can't change my mind on that. Maybe this is a good time to explain how I deal with my backlog and how I choose the games I play. And I just don't, I guess. I have a thing going on in my stream where viewers can choose what games I play. I've finished 29 games since last year doing that, 22 this year alone. And one of these games was Dead Space. I believe we all have those "why have I not played this yet" kind of games. Either being something you are always interested in since it came out, or quintessential classics. I think the only reason why I've been delaying my Dead Space playthrough so far was because I was too afraid. Not even afraid of the ambience or enemies. I remember back in the day that a few reviewers I used to follow saying that the game was quite hard, so I was expecting to suffer just like I suffered in my first Resident Evil 4 playthrough. But that wasn't the case. The game is not really challenging. In fact, it feels kind of linear, despite some optional rooms with extra loot for upgrades and ammo. The overabundance of ammo and the fact that enemies aren't the smartest creatures make the game a nice but creepy breeze to play through. I'm really not sure how or why people back then made this game sound so incredibly hard. Maybe the fact that the usual aim for the head is pretty much worthless here. However, the game tells you at least 3 times to shoot for the limbs instead, the first time being a little subtle, but the third time is almost yelling at your face. The level design isn't really special either, it's fine really, but I think that's purely because of the format in chapters. They'll always start and end at the tram station. The story and lore are interesting and all, but the narrative isn't. Most of the time you're basically doing fetch quests to fix shit within the spaceship while cutting limbs and stomping on crates. What separates Dead Space from other games is its visuals. Its setting and art direction made the experience feel quite fresh and unique. And another really surprising factor is how it still looks pretty good even for today's standards. Of course, the immersion sort of dies when you hit the thousands of invisible walls scattered across the ship or when you get close to characters' face, but the Ishimura spaceship, monsters and Isaac's armor are very well detailed and can still impress. The HUD feels super modern with everything being in a hologram in the fictional sci-fi setting. Overall, I enjoy Dead Space a lot, but it's missing that little something that I don't even know what it is. Perhaps if the gameplay was just a tad less repetitive or if the plot a bit more compelling, this would be in A rank. But Top of B is far from a bad spot. On the same backlog vibe, I got to try out what's considered by many to be the best Sonic game out there, Sonic Mania. Practically an indie game made by a very small team that developed unofficial remakes of Sonic 1, 2 and 3. Sonic Mania was a spark of hope for many 2D Sonic fans. The levels are very creative in their looks and each one of them has unique mechanics. The soundtrack is as fantastic as you would think, because of course it is, Sonic games always have outstanding bangers. But I'll be honest, this game basically confirmed that, yeah, I'm really not into D-Sonic. Maybe it was my mood at the time playing the game, maybe it was the fact that the nostalgia factor didn't really work on me since I haven't played the Mega Drive classic games. It's for sure a lot more enjoyable than Sonic 2 just by the fact that you can save. So I'll give it a B. Might be too low for a lot of fans of the series, but I have to be honest with myself. Maybe I'll give this another shot someday and try to get the Chaos Emeralds and unlock the secret ending. But for now, let's wrap up this month. As predicted, I've spent a lot less time in gaming due to university, but still managed to finish 3 games from my backlog. Did you ever feel bad about disliking a game? Like, have you ever played a game that for sure isn't bad but somehow it doesn't rub you the right way? That's how I felt while playing Baba Is You. Part of this weird puzzle subgenre called Sokoban, you have to push boxes with text and the way they get arranged will determine how the level works. It's pretty neat, but holy hell did this game gave me some Nan flashbacks to when I was in the engineering program and I'd rather do a gainer into the river than keep failing on learning how to code. Maybe the way I set up to play this game was just flat out wrong. It seems more like a game to play a level or 2 per day, put in 30 minutes whenever you can, than the type of game that the goal is to reach the end. It was satisfying to beat the game without hints, but I have to put this in C just because this game, and maybe the puzzle genre in general, just isn't for me. Okay, I know I'm being thrown into the fire after saying this, but man, I really love Resident Evil 3. It is a game with many problems, I'm well aware. I'm also aware that when compared to the original version, it's very lackluster, but I haven't played the OG, so I can't compare them. In 2024, I got to play the Resident Evil 2 remake as well, so I can compare it to that as I think Resident Evil 3 feels like a perfect DLC, and this is definitely not a compliment. Personally, the way it's structured isn't really all that fun as it plays almost as it had invisible chapters, so there isn't a lot of walking around getting keys and backtracking like Resident Evil 2 had, but I think the new gameplay features it presents makes this game slightly more fun to play when compared to its prequel. The dodge mechanic is a bit finicky at first, but when you figure it out, it becomes impossible to play the game without it. Nemesis adds a lot of tension, like a lot more tension than Mr. X, simply because this motherfucker can run. The main problem with Resident Evil 3 is that it's a bit lacking in content. The campaign feels shorter than Resident Evil 2, and there's only one campaign here, compared to Resident Evil 2's 4 story modes. It is heavily arguable if every story mode is good, but there is for sure more than just one mode. The lack of side missions like ghost stories is also a pretty big problem, as there's absolutely nothing more to do in Resident Evil 3 after you finish the story. You can try higher difficulties or get extra achievements, but the whole game has been played and you won't get anything new coming up after rolling the credits for the first time. As a matter of fact, the higher difficulties are either meaningless or incredibly annoying. I got all the way into Nightmare and it felt impossible to finish the game without infinite ammo unless you wanted to be stuck in a boss for hours just knifing it. Even after all that said, after immediately uninstalling it out of anger after my 5th playthrough, I still want to go back and get those achievements. This game is fun, dude. What can I say? Believe me, it hurts more than you think putting Resident Evil 3 in A tier. Even with the university creeping up on me, I still had a lot of time playing games, but only 2 finished games since one of them was taking a lot longer than I thought it would, but it was for sure worth my time. Okami feels sort of a cult classic. It's not particularly the most popular game Capcom ever made, but for those that played it growing up with a PlayStation 2, it became truly special to them. And honestly, just looking at it, you can tell why. It's probably the most beautiful game I've ever seen. I love its cel-shaded art style, I love the illustrations reminiscent of ukiyo-e, the atmosphere and narrative about the history of Japan with dozens of references to classic literature is just perfect. And gameplay wise, it feels a lot like a Zelda game, so it's basically as if this game was cheating its way into S tier. You can explore an overworld and cities, gathering collectibles, but also helping out people you find on the way. You get to feed wild animals, increase your health bar and your ink bar for your brush moves. The main difference when compared to Zelda is in its combat system, that I'll admit it's a tad repetitive. At least it can be done pretty quickly if you know what to do, and escaping battles is also a possibility. But even in its repetitiveness, there's a lot of variety in how to take out enemies, as the weapons available are quite different from each other. But what truly is baffling to me is how a studio managed to create such an amazing game referencing literature and other arts, but also including Japan's poetic values about nature, the religion, and to top it all off, making everything fun to explore and characters fun to listen to. And when I remember this was actually made by one of the most important publishers in gaming since the 80s, I just get more dumbfounded how a game like Okami exists. And I think a game like it will never exist again. Maybe the sequel in development will live up to the hype, Dear Amaterasu, I hope it does, but it really doesn't matter, because Okami as it is, it's already incredible. The time frame where I played it was also the best. I'm currently almost done with my major in Japanese, and learning such a difficult language with diminishing returns, it becomes harder and harder to maintain any motivation. At the time, Okami inspired me to keep going, as I ought to replay this game with the original text at some point. And I didn't even get to talk about the soundtrack, because if I did, I would be here hours gushing how amazing it is when tracks that mix traditional Japanese instruments and Western orchestral arrangements start playing, and it makes me tear up just remembering how great it was playing this game. Okami easily became one of my favorite games of all time, and I regret not playing it earlier. If I do manage to finish a playthrough Japanese text, be sure I'll make an extensive video about it. Still in May, I got to play Nier Automata, a game adored by many, so you just know how this will go. Hold up, I can explain. As I said before, I usually use C tier for games that felt disappointing. To a certain degree, I caused that on myself with Nier simply because I thought this was a hack and slash like Bayonetta or Devil May Cry, but in reality, this is an action RPG. And I must say, it isn't a particularly fun action RPG. Sure, the animations are great, the combat is satisfying, but it lacks true variety. You do get an assortment of different weapons with passive buffs, different damage and yada yada, but the fact that they mostly behave the same way was truly disappointing. Again, this was probably because I thought this was a hack and slash, so that's more on me. But the open world aspect really didn't get a hold on me as well, especially because it isn't used in any interesting way either, as traversing the map is just a chore. And the transitions from 3D to 2D lose their charm quite fast when you realize they are there to hide how the game deals with invisible walls. The side quests add absolutely nothing to the gameplay and barely anything meaningful to the world building, as the plot overstretches its themes with tropes that I'm personally tired of. Now for the real reason why this game is ranked so low is because I really didn't resonate with the plot, as the narrative was drawing something pretty obvious from the very beginning. Yes, robots have feelings. And that part is pretty easy to understand very early into the game, as it also feels uncomfortable beating the shit out of these cute little robots. But the elephant in the room is getting the extra endings, as they are really not extra. I'm keeping it spoiler light as mentioned, but having to go through the B ending just to get a full game was a bonkers idea. In the end, Nier just built an apathy from me, as it felt like the most pretentious game I've ever played. I was working on a few long games, so I felt like I was expected to spend less time in gaming in May. Also, with the semester getting close to the end, I'll have even less time coming up. Have you ever had an existential crisis after finishing a game? A game that took opinions that felt crystallized inside of you and shattered them, leaving you empty. Not only did it make you unsure about the future, but it also made you question what you value in life. It defied your morality. Would it be weird to say that Resident Evil 6 did that to me? I had the pleasure to play this in co-op with a longtime friend, Twick, so even though this game is in fact as bad as people say it is, I had a lot of fun. Friend slop was real even in 2012. And that's how Resident Evil 6 broke me. It planted doubts about my own rating system, as I would usually balance out how much fun I had with how good I think the game is. Fun being the most important one, as I don't want to feel like playing something was a waste of time. But Resident Evil 6 is just different. There's just too much I hate about this game to put in a good rank. First of all, this is probably the worst QTEs I've ever seen in a game. Second, I really hate how Capcom aimed completely towards a cinematic experience with repetitive sections of running away and car chases. They wanted so hard to make this seem like a movie that when you boot it up, you have to play a cinematic tutorial before even seeing the main menu. And third, this game has just way too many different mechanics, and half of them don't even feel useful at all. Resident Evil 6 is just too big for its own sake. Slandering big franchises made by big companies is often a gamer discourse that I definitely fell for and spread at some point. But lately I've been questioning that. Does a sequel need to be better? Perhaps this mentality from both developers and specialized media is what got us to have games like Resident Evil 6. Maybe focusing on adjectives such as bigger or better rather than good or fun might be exactly how we end up here where we are. An industry filled with clones that try to be better to cater their audience instead of being good. And maybe that's why the indie scene has been increasing both in size and popularity, as most times they feel like genuine new pieces of art from creative minds and not something made with the aid of multiple algorithms to maximize profit. The craving for endless growth and progression feels like a disease from the system we live in, and even though we condemn it, we also disseminate it. Holy shit, this derailed really fast. But what I mean is, Resident Evil 6 is kind of bad, but I'm still unable to say I didn't have a great time playing it, as it was basically the only opportunity to hang out with a longtime friend. So even though the experience was S tier, the game itself is a D tier. Playing with a friend is for sure recommended when attempting to finish this game, but when times like this come, I always remember what a philosopher once told me. Even digging a hole can be fun if you are with your friends. And this was literally the only thing I finished in June. Maybe that's why I got so existential about it. But that's okay, because winter break is just around the corner and that means I'll get to play a lot of games next month. It's time for one of those quintessential classics, as I finally got to play Chrono Trigger. Even though I played the Steam version, I couldn't believe this game was made in 1995. It's just so good. I'm not sure if it makes sense going over this entry as this game is very well known and I'm pretty much on board with everyone that loves this game. I have to say, however, that at first the only thing that interested me in Chrono Trigger was the Toriyama character design, since I'm a huge Dragon Ball fan. The truth is, the whole art direction in Chrono Trigger is amazing. I love how every era has its own distinguished look. I love how the art team managed to conserve the Toriyama look in the pixel art of enemies and party members. The time traveling mechanic is perfect. I don't know what other word can describe it, honestly. The soundtrack is also perfect. It was great to hear classics such as Corridors of Time in the game it's from instead of a YouTube video essay. Chrono Trigger was probably the best game I've played this year, as it will remain in top of S tier up until the end of the video. These timeless classics are the only reason why I narrowed down my Game of the Year choice just to release titles, because I still have a ton of these quintessential titles to go, such as Symphony of the Night, Super Metroid, Metal Gear Solid, and the list goes on. I still have a lot to do in Chrono Trigger, as I really want to get the other endings at some point, but I also don't want to use a guide to get them, so I'm not sure how that will work out. Whenever I get asked about my favorite games of all time, I always had the top 3 engraved in my brain: Ocarina of Time, Dark Souls, and Ninja Gaiden Black. Each one of them represents something I love about games, and the third one showed me that when difficulty is done correctly, it can be insanely fun. This isn't about Ninja Gaiden Black though. I play Sigma instead since I had it on Steam. It was just easier to stream it to continue my preparations for the new Ninja Gaiden titles coming up this year. And while I heard mixed opinions about the sport, it is essentially just a toned down version of one of my favorite games ever, getting the freest A tier possible. It's also worth saying that I played this game on hard since I already know the original version relatively well. When I realized that already spawns extra enemies in boss fights, I kind of regretted my decision, but later in the game I was rather comfortable with my choice. It was also my first time checking out the Rachel chapters that I always heard were awful, and they aren't really. Might be a bit frustrating to not have all the abilities that Ryo does, but I think that makes sense as she's a completely different character. I wouldn't really like to play as another character that feels exactly the same as Ryo, because if so, why not just play as him? A few changes sure got me unpleased, such as changing some soundtracks, especially for Doku's fight. Some changes in the level design were needed as it made progression a lot more intuitive, but others seemed ungranted and oversimplified the platforming aspect of Ninja Gaiden. I only finished it once and didn't look into mission mode or getting ranks for some achievements, but I'll definitely do that at some point. Even though I didn't plan it like I did with Ninja Gaiden, another series I got to know better this year was Resident Evil, with Code Veronica X being the third in a franchise I played this year. I got to play this in my Xbox 360, so just hearing was a trip to the past. Code Veronica feels like a transition title in Resident Evil. While it feels very horror, it still has some insane over-the-top action moments. But in terms of gameplay, it's still a classic Resident Evil game with the usual fixed camera aspect that feels on point every time. I love the areas, how varied they are, but also how interconnected they are, making the backtracking super fun and engaging. You start the game as Clair, but later on you get to play as Chris, and it was also super cool how some areas would change depending on which Redfield you play as. On a negative side, I do think this game might be a little too lenient on ammo, and that's probably because the bosses in this game are legit crazy. I hated every single one of them, and they alone are the sole reason why Code Veronica won't be in S tier, but it's almost there, top of A tier for sure. This is undoubtedly one of the best Resident Evil games around, and it's pretty weird how Capcom completely skipped Code Veronica on the remakes grind.
My apologies, but I cannot let you escape now. cross-dressing freak!
Okay, maybe that's why. The fact that the first release title I played this year was a remaster really says a lot about me and the state of the industry right now. I finally got to try out Ninja Gaiden 2 Black, a remake, remastered port, I don't know how the fuck I call these things anymore, of the Xbox 360 exclusive in Unreal Engine 5, which means that it runs like crap on my PC, hooray! Another game to replay after the GPU upgrade list. Just like Sigma, this is basically a toned down version of a game very special to me. Ninja Gaiden 2 was one of the reasons why I wanted an Xbox 360 as a kid, and looking at these upgraded graphics transported me back to 2008 as 11-year-old me was baffled by the insane visuals the sequel had. I heard this new Unreal Engine 5 version is more similar to Sigma 2 than the original. I haven't played Sigma 2 so I can't compare it to that. I could tell, however, that the number of enemies didn't feel claustrophobic and chaotic as it did in the original. While that might sound like a good change, it comes with a cost. I can't believe I'm about to say this about a Ninja Gaiden game, but holy shit, this game is way too easy. I started my playthrough on hard, somewhat scared about it, and I finished my playthrough with 0 deaths. Not even 0 game over screens. I didn't even get to use a Talisman of Rebirth. So by the end, my only regret was not playing it on very hard from the get-go. I could say that this might be the best Ninja Gaiden for newcomers, but I've seen streamers struggling with this a lot, so I'm not really sure. I honestly think Ninja Gaiden 2 Black deserves to be in B tier, but I just had so much fun with it that I simply cannot not put it in A. Honestly, if I had a decent GPU, I would be grinding achievements in this game for weeks, but I really want to appreciate it after an upgrade since the visual quality is a major feature of this game. July, as expected, was one hell of a month. Only great games were finished and I got to spend a lot of time in gaming too. Winter break is over, so I probably won't be seeing months like this until December. In August, I finally get to tick something off my gaming bucket list. Finish a Final Fantasy game. And I decided to play what's considered by many fans as the worst starting point possible. The very beginning. Final Fantasy I, the NES version, was a very mixed experience. While it had some good moments, most of them were completely outshined by the pure torture that is going through a game so lacking in quality of life features. I know that's to be expected from a game from the 80s, but it doesn't really change the fact that Final Fantasy I is fundamentally broken, as it has a bunch of mechanics that straight up don't work, and the game doesn't communicate any important mechanics such as item effects, passive buffs, etc. One thing that I was oddly fond of was the battle system, which is the most basic turn-based combat ever, but since attacks will miss if the targeted enemy dies before the party member completes their action, I found myself planning out attacks even for basic battles instead of mindlessly mashing A to get through a fight. Also, I've heard games from this era were almost unplayable without grinding XP, and I must say that isn't all that true about Final Fantasy I. I only had to farm levels by the end of the game when I was already fed up with all the other bullshit it was throwing at me. Even though the experience with Final Fantasy was horrible, it will remain a very special game for me simply because it was the first NES game I've ever finished without save states. But as I said, it's broken to the core. I really can't give anything higher than a C for a game that barely works. I definitely want to make a video about these experiences. I think it can turn into a funny video. Let's see how it goes.
Dear anybody reading this, I'm probably dead. That wouldn't be surprising. Everybody else is. There was some kind of apocalypse, and then all that was left was me. Well, most of me. All in all, hasn't been so bad. Till yesterday. My favorite game cartridge finally broke. So I think I'm gonna go out and make a friend. I'll have to go out there. Outside. It's a dangerous, twisted place with death, decay, and death mostly. But you know what? Imagine all the fun we'll have, me and my friend, you know? Collecting tumors, spitting teeth for distance. Or hey, you know, if I do it right, repopulate the world. It won't be easy, but I have nothing left to lose, except my other eye. Oh well, fuck it!
From the twisted mind behind Super Meat Boy, The End is Night is kind of similar to Super Meat Boy. It's a precision platformer with questionable cancer humor. The collectibles are literally called tumors, and they are essential to the gameplay, as it makes the screens more fun to play through. Getting better at it feels nice, but there's a twist in the midway point of the game that will push away a lot of people from reaching credits in The End is Night, which is a shame because I liked this game. I'm not crazy about it, but it was really fun overall, getting an easy B tier, even though the final section almost made me lose it. The End is Night is a great game, but it's definitely not made for me. This is clearly a game for the most deranged platformer fans and not just a filthy casual. You might never heard of Alex Kidd, but this Sega character was widely popular with gamers in Brazil back in the late 80s, early 90s. So in case you're not Brazilian, you might see Alex Kidd in Miracle World as just a forgettable game from the 80s. But for me, it's like playing a true classic that rivals Super Mario Bros. For the NES. I've played the remade version, however, mostly with the retro visuals of course, because they look awesome, and I'm glad I did since it has a save system, so I didn't need to replay the whole game after losing all my lives, just the entire level. And I don't know man, this game just screams cozy for me. I love the soundtrack, the colors are so stunning, and it just has a lot of charm. Alex Kidd is a basic platformer with a few mechanics going on, which add a bit of flavor to the gameplay, but it comes with a cost in not so clever level design as the game goes by. After finishing it, I had very few achievements left, and since I really enjoyed the game, I decided to tackle them. So let's rank it at B for now. Why not? There was slightly silly like a boss rush mode that doesn't have every boss in the game, just the rock paper scissors ones. Find a few secret passages and get every collectible. Super fun little game that really made me want to go after a Master System and play some other classics. Still on Timeless Classics, I got this shady piece of hardware to play my SNES on HDMI and managed to finish Super Mario World after a somewhat unambitious stream to test my retro setup. I haven't played this game in probably over 10 years, so seeing this again but now with a decent controller was fantastic. In fact, do I still need to say this game is fantastic? The problem with getting these quintessential games in this kind of video is that there isn't much new to say, especially if I'm in the vast majority that considers this game to be great. I'll say though that when I finished it again, I was under the impression that perhaps the difficulty curve in Super Mario World was a bit too steep after the second world, but after playing a particular game later in the year, I realized that platformers do need a bit of a steeper progression to keep things fun. A platformer that's too easy ends up being pretty forgettable, and one too hard just frustrating. I think Super Mario World hits the perfect spot in between. S tier game without a doubt. It's pretty hard to talk about the messenger without spoiling things, so I'll be clear. To explain why I feel the way I feel about this game, I need to go through a pretty big twist in gameplay that happens after 4 hours in approximately. Clearly heavily inspired by Ninja Gaiden, the messenger starts as an action platformer. Later on to the game we hit a time traveling twist and this 8-bit looking game turns into a 16-bit looking game. It's pretty neat, and along with it the messenger also morphs into Metroidvania. While that's a twist I don't think I've seen a game do before, I would say they compromise a bit of the quality of the game overall, especially in level design. Since backtracking is expected in this new genre, I feel like up until the twist everything was way too basic to figure out. Personally, I started having more fun after the Metroidvania shift. The messenger has way more ups than downs, that's for sure. Gameplay is quite solid and intuitive for the most part. The visuals are absolutely insane and are probably within the best pixel art I've ever seen. The soundtrack is good, don't get me wrong, but sometimes it feels a bit over the tone what it needs to be. There are great tracks to listen to, but sometimes I'm just gliding around doing nothing special and the game's going the humor does not work on me. The shopkeeper has his moments and got some laughs out of me, but most of the time I'll just stare soullessly at the screen when the game overstretches jokes for way too long. Regardless, The Messenger is worth playing, conquering a solid position in B. Funny enough, I think The End is Night is a better game overall, but I just had a lot more fun in The Messenger. After all, it was fun enough to make me go after all green medals. Pretty good month overall with mostly platformers. I expected August to be less packed up, so the number of finished games sure surprised me. There isn't anything going on next month, so I'll probably be able to take gaming a little slower in September. Well, fuck. You probably heard of this game. You probably played this game day one. Maybe you spent copious amount of time on Twitter hoping to see any news about this game. After 6 years of development and full silence from Team Cherry, it felt like Silksong would never become a reality. So you know nothing could have gone wrong after booting it up and finally putting all this anticipation to rest. Alright, you probably also know where most points get criticized in Silksong, so I'll go over the topic, is it too hard? My main drawback with this game is that it is hard in an unfun way. Giving double damage to most enemies very early on made my sense of progression almost non-existent. Starting out with 5 masks will take 2 extra ones, meaning 8 different pieces to be collected to endure just 1 extra hit. Needless to say, this takes a while, and by the time it happens you're likely facing enemies and bosses that will make this extra HP feel meaningless. So what's really the point in keep exploring? The upgrades don't feel worth the time investment. New crests also didn't entice me as often they would just mess up movement and momentum. And the worst part is the overabundance of the so-called gauntlets, waves of enemies that need to be defeated in order to move on to the next room. They're fucking everywhere. They get repetitive really fast since enemies aren't fun to fight and the reward is just another item that won't have any meaningful impact. Also, everything in Silksong just looks so dull. There's barely any color in the game for the most part. Even though it has more details and looks better than Hollow Knight 1, the gray filter of depression over every area just made things less interesting to me. When it comes to the story, I'll be honest. Nowadays I rarely pay attention to plots that are lore-centric, so Silksong lost me quite fast. Also made me realize how much I prefer silent protagonists overall, as I never felt like Hornet's dialogue was adding anything to what was going on. Even though I can't really go over the plot, I can go over the story progression, which is for sure unlike anything I've seen before. This is not a compliment, by the way. I promised this would be spoiler light, so I'll just say that there is a third act in Silksong, and getting there requires more than just finishing up Act 2. I just know it involves some side quests, and I don't know which ones honestly. They are all so boring that I never bothered looking up what I had to do, especially because I was already pretty fed up with the game after getting to one of the worst areas ever made in a video game, with one of the worst bosses ever made in a video game. I got the basic ending, and then I just move on. Silksong was the biggest disappointment I've ever had in gaming. I'm not even mad about it, or angry, or indifferent. I'm just sad. It saddens me because I don't think Hollow Knight is just an alright game. Hollow Knight is one of my favorite games ever and will probably forever be one of the best indie games I've ever played. And Silksong felt like a game that catered only to the hardcore fanbase like challenge runners and speedrunners. And I can't say I'm particularly excited about the future of Silksong, nor the future of Team Cherry. I should have dropped this game when I reached its peak. At least I got to play a cozy game right afterwards. Psychonauts was likely the game that made me laugh the most the entire year.
Hey, good job, soldier. Now here's your reward.
It doesn't have much going on in terms of gameplay, but the more I think about it, the more I like it. I was expecting it to be more of a 3D platformer, as in I would have to do a lot of jumping around on platforms. That wasn't the case. Psychonauts is more of a collectathon, meaning it's a world meant to be explored so you can find collectibles. While I'm not super into games like this anymore, it was enough to get me hooked to do some extra exploration from time to time. This game's characters and dialogue are fantastic, but the best thing about it is by far the areas within their psyche. The Milkman stage is probably the weirdest and most fun and funny area I've ever seen in a game. I was laughing from start to finish, basically.
And the sea shall run white with his rage.
I thought the game overall was too easy, but I had to constantly remind myself that this was targeted to kids, so I would usually wonder if I would have such an easy time with this game back when I was 10. But honestly, we need more games like this. A game that's not just creative in concepts and design, but is introductory to gamers in their early age. And despite its craziness, it still manages to discuss topics such as trauma, self-esteem, and mental health issues. That alone already is deserving of an A tier. Psychonauts is truly amazing. Whenever I hear about Nights into Dreams, it's usually from a big fan of the game and they just say how much they love it or how much the Sega Saturn graphics blew their minds back then. But they never bother explaining what's the game about. Each stage is a small 3D area that is explorable in 3D if you can handle the horrible controls when you play as the kids. But when you take control of Nights, you lose the ability to move in the third dimension, meaning this becomes a 2D platformer. And you can't exactly move freely as well, as each mare has set courses in the arena. The objective is to retrieve the star spheres while getting as many points as possible, making the experience a bit more arcadey. If you don't want to grind rankings, you're in for a pretty short and sweet experience with Nights. I managed to beat it in 3 hours. It is a pretty flawed game, mostly due to its early 3D roots where experimentation was still needed, but I miss experimentational games like these nowadays. After 30 years of knowing how to deal with 3 dimensions, we seem to be stuck into the same formulas as what works and what doesn't work are widely known by developers, so they will never risk something as ambitious and creative as this Sega title, genuinely deserving to be in B tier, a true classic indeed. I wanted to spend a bit less time in gaming this month, but I guess that didn't happen. I'll blame Silksong. And next month I'll get to play Ninja Gaiden 4, the game I've been waiting for the whole year, so you can be damn sure I'll get a fuck ton of hours of gaming in October. But first, let's go back to the classics again. I finally got to finish a Castlevania game. I don't believe I've played anything in the series before, so that was a very cool experience. Whenever I play NES games, I usually think, okay, this is fun and all, but when is the suffering? Suffering in these games from the 80s is just a matter of time. But weirdly enough, Castlevania 2 was mostly intuitive. It sure has the usual overly cryptic progression we all hate, but I feel like they were better spaced out. But what truly astonished me was how complex this game was. There's a day and night cycle in the NES? That's just really impressive. The progression is somewhat similar to how Metroidvanias are nowadays. You don't really get new skills to get to new areas. Simon's Quest is more centered around key items, but I can see the roots of the genre here for sure. Game overs aren't all that punishing as well. When you lose all your lives, you just lose unused experience points, but you keep your level and even stay on the screen you died on, something that felt very modern. Needless to say, I managed to beat it without save states given how generous this was. The experience system being influenced by what area you are felt pretty unique. Would have been great if the game told me how it works at all. Even the manual says absolutely nothing about it, and that's literally the only reason why I won't rank this game higher than B tier. If Castlevania 2 just had a better HUD and a helpful manual, this would have been A, maybe S tier even. Next was a game that also surprised me, but the other way around. Ninja Gaiden 3 Razor's Edge was not a great experience. I remember trying to play it 10 years ago and rage quitting at this boss. Now a bit more mature and hopefully a bit less biased biased from content creators' opinions, I wanted to try it out again in preparation for Ninja Gaiden 4. And even though Razor's Edge is a fixed version of Ninja Gaiden 3 with added weapons, trials, challenges and characters, sometimes a game is too broken in its core to be saved. I know Razor's Edge has their fans and they praise its combat a lot, and I have to say that's fair. The combat is the best part of the game undoubtedly. I'm not a huge fan of new mechanics such as Steel on Bone, since it makes things a bit too automatic in my opinion, while Ultimate and Obliteration techniques were great ways to add a bit of downtime for some rest during the Havoc. Essentially, it's very similar to how Ninja Gaiden 2 feels. The main problem in Razor's Edge, however, is the lack of fun fights. And I'm not even saying the bosses in Ninja Gaiden 3 suck. The enemy encounters are just way too repetitive. Each chapter has this transition where Ryu gets taken by the grip of murder curse, and they never get anything new. Every chapter you see several sections of a relatively broad corridor or room with rocket launcher dudes that can only be killed with your bow. It's not great. It really isn't. Another mechanic that really hurt the overall quality of Ninja Gaiden 3 was its healing system. To heal, you have to cast a special Nimpo, and the more enemies you kill with it, the more you heal. And the Nimpo gauge takes a while to fill up, so you won't be able to heal as often as you'd like. One could argue this makes things harder, I could agree, but it makes it harder in frustrating and unfun ways. Later on, I also realized how the lack of items also hurt the level design in Ninja Gaiden 3, making the game extremely linear, without branching paths or any exploration whatsoever. And if that wasn't enough, it will take 5 full seconds until the game reminds you to press the Ubisoft button just in case you're lost. By the time I got to the final mission, I just want it to be done, so I honestly can't rank it any higher than C. I could also go on how I find the plot to be even more cheesy and stupid when compared to the other games, but I feel like nobody cares about the story, and nobody should really. It had this very cool callback to the NES game at least. We are on a low streak right now because the next game is Zelda 2, the black sheep of the series. And I must say that the detractors were right. The Adventure of Link comes from a time when making sequels weren't so obvious, so this game feels a lot different from its prequel. But I'm not a big Zelda 1 fan to begin with, so my expectations were already pretty low. And there's just too much I dislike about this game, especially after playing something like Castlevania 2, a game very generous in its game over. Being sent back to the start of the map every time you lose all your lives was not fun at all. The dungeons are pretty good, I have to admit, but removing the maps felt like a terrible step backwards from Zelda 1. I know some people consider the whole series to be RPG games, I sure don't, so being able to level up and choose attributes that I want to increase in a Zelda game felt pretty alien-like to me. And I just hate how if you just want to not die in 2 hits from any enemy, the only option is to farm experience. I probably ended up farming more here than in Final Fantasy. And since this is an action RPG, I lost all the confidence of farming while watching a stream or YouTube. Instead, I had to be laser focused to not die as I killed the same enemy hundreds of times. I farmed so much that I actually ended the game with maximum level on everything. I also got every heart piece and magic upgrade, meaning that I accidentally 100%ed Zelda 2, which is great because I don't have any excuse to ever go back to it. I managed to not save scum my way into the ending, but I did have to use save states to practice the final boss. Even though it felt pretty good to get better at the boss, I just didn't have a lot of fun playing Zelda 2, being the lowest game in my ranking this year. So Resident Evil 6 at least gets to hang out with someone in D tier. Luckily for Zelda 2, I got to play the worst game I've ever finished in my life right after, Yaiba Ninja Gaiden Z, the game that killed the franchise for 10 years. I really wanted to beat this game to finish my year of the ninja preparations, and oh boy, I hated my decision. Throughout the whole game, I just had one constant question in my mind. Why? Why go for a God of War inspired gameplay when you could use the actual Ninja Gaiden franchise's framework? Why settle for a zombie apocalypse plot? Why so many horny jokes? Why make the villain of the game not shut the fuck up? Yaiba is just very bland and derivative. The combat is repetitive and gets old very fast. When it tries to develop its more intricate mechanics, it's already way too late, and the mechanics are also pretty awful as they rely on temporary weapons. The visuals are cool, but since the camera is atrocious, the cel-shaded art just becomes a fucking mess when the camera is all zoomed out and you can barely understand what's going on and where you are. Once again, no reason to go over plot in a series that nobody really cares about the story, but Jesus fucking Christ, why every character sucks? That's the weirdest portraits of Ryu ever, giving him blue cheese stinking lines such as him saying, "I see good in you too," a fucking psychopath. Yaiba himself is just a mountain of muscles and rage without a single living brain cell. And Del Gonzo, holy fucking shit, Del Gonzo is the worst villain I've ever seen in a video game. Eccentric billionaire that will not shut the fuck up and will endlessly crack unfunny joke after unfunny pun. And to finish it all off, even the sound in this game is horrible. When did I ever complain about fucking sound in a video game? And I'm not even talking about the extremely generic EDM soundtrack. I'm talking about the sound effects in the game simply disappearing from time to time. Do I really need to say in which tier does this shit belong? But it's finally time. The moment I've been waiting for the entire year is finally here. I was 100% sure Ninja Gaiden 4 was going to be my game of the year, but since we're not at the end of the video, you know that it is not. So I can't deny that I'm slightly disappointed by the game, but also impossible to say that I didn't have a lot of fun playing it. I should make a more in-depth video about it after its DLC is out, detailing why I think Ninja Gaiden 4 is in fact a pretty good game, but here I'll go over the basics. First of all, the combat is pretty good. Every 3D Ninja Gaiden so far had fundamentally different mechanics, so that's no surprise that's the case for Ninja Gaiden 4. Not being made by Team Ninja this time, but having Platinum Games partner with them, brought to the table a couple of different features that will feel weird to veterans of the series and might even repel them from trying out this new entry. The most important one being a parry feature that resembles Metal Gear Rising, and the dodge reminding more of a Bayonetta but not as generous. Having healing items and accessories back was the absolutely right move, as it helps making the level design not feel one-dimensional as it was in Razor's Edge and Yaiba, but that's a pretty low bar, as Ninja Gaiden 4's areas and platforming are nowhere near the level of brilliance they were in Ninja Gaiden Black, or even its toned out version Sigma. And that's why I have to rank it lower than that, but still in A. I think Platinum made a really good job with this new entry. It still feels like a Ninja Gaiden game, but at the same time it feels somewhat foreign. There are just a lot of new aspects throughout the whole game, like new dodging mechanics, songs with vocals and lyrics, a new protagonist. Overall, I think they really nailed the essence of what is a Ninja Gaiden game, with the exception of one thing. There is a reason why this series was dead for 10 years. While a bunch of fanboys might say it's because the absence of Itadaki heavily affected the future of the series, I think this was somewhat doomed to happen sooner or later. Since the early days of Xbox, Ninja Gaiden was a niche game. It catered to the weird motherfuckers that enjoy action games but wanted a high dose of suffering. Ninja Gaiden wasn't exactly hard for the sake of being hard. It was hard for the sake of having challenges that feel different to overcome. That being different enemies, bosses with lackeys, or just some fun platforming. Not a lot of people will be into everything Ninja Gaiden had to offer, so this niche grew more and more isolated from the casual audience. Ninja Gaiden 4 Core clearly tries to approach this audience since, as any AAA game, it needs to generate profit as soon as possible. And the way it approaches then is by adding a bunch of accessibility features. I can see some of them being actually helpful, such as warning icons for heavy attacks or just a camera that does the job correctly. But stuff like automatic movement and parkour for sections that were already extremely streamlined to feel like really long loading screens is baffling to me. Having to spend time turning a bunch of these settings off just to get an experience that doesn't feel hand-holdy was not something I expected to see in a Ninja Gaiden game. Even with a bunch of flaws, I just can't stop loving this game. I want to play more all the freaking time, but it's also in the GPU upgrade replay list. In the end, I'm just glad to be excited about Ninja Gaiden again. One of my favorite series is back and I couldn't be happier. Over 100 hours of gameplay. That's the month I've played the most in the year. And since responsibilities from university have been piling up since August, that means I'm pulling the brakes really hard the next couple of months. So expect less finished games. As an echo of the horror vibes from Halloween, I start November by finishing Alan Wake. Having played Control early this year had me hyped to try out other Remedy titles, so Alan Wake was a no-brainer of a choice, as it was also another title that I've been delaying to play for years since the Xbox 360 days. What got me hooked in Alan Wake was definitely its story. The concept of a writer that lives his own creation but doesn't remember what he wrote is just very clever. I can't say the narrative is as good as it is in Control, as I felt that Alan Wake overtly relies on using TV shows aesthetics to tell its story, and I just kinda hate when games do that. But also the gameplay in Alan Wake is pretty boring. You get a lantern to weaken enemies and then you shoot them. You get different weapons here and there that might make the gameplay a tad more interesting, but in essence every enemy encounter feels the same. I want to say the DLC feels a tad different at least, but I managed to fuck up and get soft lock when I played the first one, so I sort of dropped it after beating the main game. I still want to go back to finish the extra chapters, as they seem to add a lot to the plot, so that alone makes Alan Wake deserving to be in B tier. I don't know when I'll do that, however. Another first time in a long-standing series, this time with Kirby's Adventure. The cozy vibes are immaculate. The colors are both bright but also slightly pastel given the NES limitations. It's pretty wild how much they managed to pull off in 8-bit, not just visually but also mechanically. Kirby's Adventure is pretty impressive. The overworld with warps and extra modes, the way it opens up every time a stage is finished, the surprising number of different enemies with different power-ups, the unique abilities you get from killing bosses, the way it had a built-in manual explaining mechanics with a cutscene, all of that makes this game quite jaw-dropping. All of that comes with a cost, however. This game's horrible performance. The NES is far from a powerhouse even back in the day, so anything more than 3 sprites and the hardware was already starting to sweat, and holy shit, Kirby had a fuck ton of sprites per screen, making this game lag like crazy. It legit feels like it goes half speed sometimes. That alone isn't much of a problem, of course, but given the frequency it happens, and the fact that the game already feels super slow, it's pretty hard to not get annoyed by it. When it comes to the game itself, Kirby's Adventure is sort of a drag. Outside of a few boss fights, I never felt the difficulty curve like ever. It was more of a difficulty line that wasn't steep at all. The weirdest thing about the stages is how they all have multiple exits that will always lead to the end of the level. While that's pretty cool in concept, sometimes it just made me feel lost. Like I was going in circles but always reaching the destination. After a couple of levels I sort of just accepted it. In essence, the levels do feel well designed, but I guess Kirby is just too overpowered to design something that can be too difficult. Often to get past certain platforming, all that is needed is to eat the enemy right next to you. That is also the case for getting past bosses. I wanted to rank this in C tier, but I do believe that games like Kirby are very important to exist. Chances are you watching me started playing video games as a kid. Maybe if you go back to the games you enjoyed back then, you might find a couple of them to be stale or even straight up bad, but they had at least something captivating enough to keep the younger you holding a controller as years went by. And Kirby's true power is its captivating captivating force. Its streamlined and simple mechanics and pace might be boring to me, but they also might just be what a kid first holding a controller needs. I know bottom of B tier is far from a great spot, but I believe we shouldn't neglect children games as lower and less valuable games, because they are truly the foundation of our hobby. As I said, a lot less time in gaming this November, that was to be expected, with not a whole lot of free time in December due to a vacation trip with family and end of the year holidays. I decided to focus my time on the game that defined 2025. I had my eyes on Clair Obscur the moment it was revealed. The visuals looked stunning in that trailer, the concept of the story was intriguing, and being a project of a small team based in France that fully embraced and incorporated their culture into their game was just a guaranteed purchase for me. I just didn't expect to become this fucking huge. What first got my attention in Clair Obscur was how stylish the menus were. While that might sound ridiculous for people not used to turn-based games, a well-designed and intuitive HUD changes the whole experience in these games. The areas are also very detailed and super pretty, and while following RPG tropes like forest and caves, it never felt derivative. Every landscape, every landmark, and every corner in Clair Obscur look and feel unique and fitting to its world. Character design is also really charming, and every single one of them has tons of different outfits and hairstyles to choose from. But what separates this game from all the other releases this year is its outstanding soundtrack. From character themes to normal battles, all songs in the game are absolutely incredible on how they can deliver the emotional punch needed, being an extremely moving part of the game, a silly one, or just something to get you hyped for a battle. Much like Okami reignited my drive to study Japanese, Clair Obscur made me regret the fact that I stopped studying French years ago, as I really wish I could fully understand these lyrics. It's crazy how just hearing it again sends shivers down my bones and waters my eyes. I don't even understand the lyrics to the fullest, but there's just so much emotion in the melody and the string instruments, and oh my fucking god, at least Dupont Persier's voice is magical in any language. French, English, whatever the fuck this is. And finally, the story. I won't go over it a lot since I promised this would be spoiler light, so all I can say is that Clair Obscur is one of the best works of art about moving on I've ever experienced. From beginning to end, it hit us with pain and loss, but it also reiterates the importance of maintaining our hope on a brighter tomorrow. Maybe not for us, but perhaps for those who come after. And it does that without being cheesy or overly optimistic. It shows that being hopeful isn't about naivety or a carefree stance on the future. It is about not giving up, and that is a lot harder than one would think it is. Clair Obscur's ending was a really hard pill to swallow, and it's been haunting me for weeks now, but I'm really glad I got to experience this game last year. That being said, dear god, I fucking hate this battle system. While it can draw in people that are definitely not into turn-based RPGs, I am not one of those people. I really enjoy turn-based games, so I can take my time, plan what to do, test different strategies, all of that while being relaxed but at the same time engaged. The way Clair Obscur engages the players through an active parry and dodge mechanic I thought was severely underdeveloped throughout the game. Essentially, every fight in the game is the same. You deal moderate damage in your turn and a fuck ton of more damage on the enemy's turn if you parry correctly. And it never felt like the game ever tried pushing these mechanics to the limit besides just giving bosses more attacks per turn with finicky parry timings. It feels like nothing matters. Bosses don't react differently if they are burnt or debuffed, they just attack. And you just parry. Admittedly, if there was a way to not have to engage with this system 100% of the time and not make fights 5 times longer, I would have liked this game a lot more. A block button really wouldn't hurt. Even though I wasn't super into the battle system, I was always returning to Clair Obscur and doing a lot of side quests, just because I wanted to. Putting a total of 69 hours into the game really proves that I had fun playing it. I don't think it was a feeling of fear of missing out or anything, but I guess it just sucks not loving a game the same way everybody does. I really can't put this in a tier higher than B, and that sucks even more because I do find this game to be special, but at least the AI controversy doesn't make me feel bad about not putting it in A tier. Just one finished game to wrap up the year, not only to put the brakes a little, but I also didn't want to give myself unnecessary work for this video and postpone it even further. Releasing this in January is already sort of late for the YouTube standards, but before moving on to my game of the year, I need to talk about the game I've played the most this year, but I never got to finish, as I also don't even know if I can finish such game. It's impossible not to talk about Stardew Valley, as I clocked in 130 hours into this game in 2025, making it by far my most played game last year. I started playing it on December 2024, and I decided that I didn't want to use wikis at all, and I still haven't. Every time I finish a game, I'll go back to Stardew as a palate cleanser, as whenever I'm here I don't really have a goal of reaching credits. I can just relax, do some farming, do some mining, and talk to people in town. It's a game all about knowledge, so quite unfortunately it really can't be relived ever again once you get a better understanding of how things work. That, however, makes learning game mechanics and characters' backgrounds even more special. Weirdly enough, it feels like I don't have much to talk about this game, because its special moments aren't grandiose by any means. Instead, they feel simple and they stand out by the level of intimacy you get to develop with the characters in the game. That was probably the idea, as the whole motto of Stardew is getting to live a life closer to nature within a small community. There's no need to thrive, no need for survival, but instead we are here to reconnect to the small moments that makes life great to live. I wasn't expecting to like this game that much, and even though I haven't finished this game yet, I feel like over 100 hours of gameplay is more than enough to grant me the right to rank this somewhere. And it really couldn't be anywhere else but in S tier. I guess these cozy farm simulator games might actually be my cup of tea. What is Game of the Year material for you? A game that pushes the boundaries of its media, an incredible immersive gameplay experience, or perhaps a plot that plays with your emotions? I don't think there's a set answer to this question, but thinking about my picks in previous years, I would say Game of the Year is something that gets me excited about the future, but it's also able to reconnect to my past self that found out video games were my passion. When I think about it, there's only one game that can take up the spot. Gaiden Ragebound is exactly the link between past and future I'm talking about. This is the game that actually revived the series. As much as remasters and ports are cool and all, they'll never have the same impact of a new game. And Ragebound is even more interesting as it's a new take on the 2D side of Ninja Gaiden, something that hasn't been attempted since the 90s. Not just that, but Tecmo getting an indie team, the Game Kitchen, was the best choice they've ever made, making this sort of like the Sonic Mania of Ninja Gaiden. In Ragebound, the main character isn't Ryu Hayabusa, but his disciple Kenji, and how he is forced to side with Kumori, a kunoichi from the rival clan, the Black Spider clan. Plot isn't something I usually care for in Ninja Gaiden, and I must say Ragebound isn't all that great either, but something I appreciate from this game is how it expanded the world within Ninja Gaiden. The original meaning of the word Gaiden is unofficial or unregistered story, so there isn't any real need for a linearity or cohesive narrative between different titles. But the Game Kitchen did it anyways, as Ragebound is set in parallel with Ryu's mission in the first NES game, with Kenji and Komori's quest being set in Japan. The prologue, which is a tutorial, is the cutscene from the original game from '88. Along with that, we also have short references to events that occurred in Ninja Gaiden 2. The soundtrack is also fantastic and can get anybody hyped for some platforming action. And it obviously features a couple of reimagination of older and classic tracks from the series. And if that wasn't cool enough, the developers even got some of the composers from the original games to make new songs. And the pixel art speaks for itself and really doesn't need me to compliment how incredible it is. On a gameplay perspective, Ragebound is also pretty similar to the NES game. Kenji can jump, sword slash, and wall climb. But along with that, we also have the hypercharge attacks that can one-hit kill any enemy. When accompanied by Komori, you also get access to range attacks and a special move called Ragebound that will usually swipe enemies from the screen. The stages are also divided in acts, and they are quite different from each other. For example, in Act 1 you can only use Kenji, while in Act 2 you can only use Komori. There are a bunch of purchasable accessories you can get from Muramasa, and the currency is the returning golden scarabs that work as collectibles in the stages too. These accessories can be new moves and passive buffs that will change the way you approach combat and movement in general. A big difference from the other game is that respawns are basically instantaneous, just like Celeste or Super Meat Boy, making the pacing of the game basically perfect. I'll admit that in my first few hours in Ragebound, I was heavily frustrated by the difficulty in this game, probably because I didn't want to use the talismans to help me out. When I decided to stop being stubborn, the difficulty in the game decreased significantly. Maybe that's why they were there, huh? And even after hours of frustration, I still wanted to keep playing. And that's where this game's greatest feature lies: replayability. Every stage earns you with a rank upon completion. To rank higher, you need to fulfill several challenges in the stage, finish it under a certain time, kill a particular number of enemies, maintain a kill streak high enough, and get every collectible in the area. When replaying stages, you see how they were precisely crafted to keep the momentum going while exploring everything on the level. You can't just run through them to finish them faster. You can't farm enemies since respawning enemies don't add up to the kill streak, and you need to know every secret hidden if you want that S rank. Of course you can make it easier with talismans, but if somehow you find them to be too easy, there are talismans that make the game harder. If you use them, you get rewarded with extra ranks that can go up to S++. And if somehow that still isn't enough for you, there's a hard mode that makes platforming a bit more unforgiving, enemies more abundant, bosses just a tad faster, and the stage challenges even tighter. And when grinding some S and S++ ranks, I realized the true essence of Ninja Gaiden was here all along. Ragebound is a game that pushes you to go further. The more you give to the game, the more it gives back. So I decided I wanted to go through hard mode and get all achievements. And even though I did that, I still feel like I'm not done with Ragebound, as S and S++ ranks in all stages aren't really required to get all achievements. And there are a few unlockable outfits behind getting perfect ranks all across the game. Ninja Gaiden Ragebound showed me that there are still plenty of new things you can do with an old model. The perfect balance between old school and modern. A game that is both pretty accessible but also pleasantly difficult. The perfect reminder that when facing challenges we have to be always brave. On a personal note, 2025 was not a happy year for me. It's been years since the future seemed so unsure like it is now. I've been questioning myself about past decisions and if they were the correct ones. But whenever I'm playing games, I can just not focus on that, as I can hang out with friends, think of what I'm going to write later about what I play, and slowly improve a few creative skills such as writing scripts and video editing. This might not be the healthiest approach, but all these 37 finished games, I did not regret playing any of them. And the 800 hours in gaming and streaming made me feel closer to my friends as I shared the experiences with them. And that's why I said in the very beginning, ratings don't matter. Each game was an experience worth going through, no matter how low they were ranked or how much shit I talked about them. Ratings are just an easy way to turn subjectivity into something objective, and that's why they don't mean much without what I have to say about the game. I feel like in 2026 we should have been past the objectivity in reviews, but here's another reminder that opinions can be different from each other, and that's okay. That's what makes video games true art. Thank you everyone that stuck with me during my streams. You are all very awesome. And in case you got all the way to the end of this video, jeez, I'm so sorry. I'll try to make a better video next time, I promise. Post some pineapple emoji for like engagement or something. But I'm not a real YouTuber. I don't know how that works. I have a few ideas that I want out of the paper this year, including the elusive Dark Souls 2 video I promised over a year ago. But I already committed to 3 or 4 videos for individual games I talked about here. So I'll just shut the fuck up and end the video because this shit is already too long.